give a tour, and Jack was basically looking for a place to do the next White Stripes record. And so he picks Blackbird. They get Joe Ciccarelli. It's great. Come over. And I was at the time building Studio C with George. We were building all that. We were finishing that up. And so one day, Meg doesn't like people to look at her. And she was recording down in Studio D, and there's a hallway that runs between the two machine rooms. And I was putting in this video server thing for George, this crazy video thing. And I was standing there sort of adminning the server, doing the least fun, audio thing ever, adminning a video server. And I heard the door open, and I just looked, and I caught her eye as she went into the control room. And then about 5 minutes later, Jack comes out and he's like, "What are you doing out here? What's going on? Why are you out here?" Asking me questions because, I guess I looked at the artist, And then I said, "Look, I'm just doing this. This is the only place where I can be to do this. It's right here. There's a monitor, but I'll go around the back." He's like, "Nah, man, don't worry about it. It's cool. Don't worry about it." But he goes, "Hey, do you have any Alamo, or do you have any airline? Do you have like an airline or an Alamo or something like that, spring reverb, something, or a Fender?" And I was like, "Well, I have an airline, or not an airline. I have an Alamo." He's like, "Oh yeah." He goes, "Cool." He goes, "Can I get it?" I go, "Yeah, let me go get it." And he goes, I go, "It's down at my studio. Let me go get it." He goes, "Why do you have a studio?" And I'm like, "Because you have this studio. That's why I have a studio, because you're in here." He's like, "Oh." He goes, "Where is it?" I go, "It's just right down the street. It's right next to," there was a studio called East Iris that's now was House of Blues, and now it's Universal. But I go, "So it's down there next to, East Iris." He's like, "Oh, really?" He goes, "What do you got?" I go, "Oh, I got this and that." He's got a tape machine. I go, "No, but my partner does. He has a MCI. Or no, I think at the time he owned Atari." But he's like, "Cool." So I went and got that, and they used that actually on the song Icky Thump on the Univox, that crazy Univox organ thing.
Yeah.
So fast forward a couple months, and one day Jack White just walks in studio. He just saw a car there, and he just goes in. And so we end up talking a little bit. I don't think anything of it. A week goes by, and he calls me. Jack doesn't have a cell phone, by the way. He borrows people's cell phone, which is hilarious. Or he uses somebody else's phone. Usually at that time, it was Patrick Keeler. He would use Patrick's phone. And so called me, and he was like, "Hey, I've got a date booked at Blackbird with Danger Mouse. Can you engineer the session?" I was like, "Yeah, sure, of course." So Brian and him show up, and it was for the Rome record,
right?
Which is really a beautiful piece of work. And we cut all the vocals on it, and I asked him. I kind of set everything up so that we could print all the effects. I brought a couple of my tape echoes and space echo, and we had a plate. And then Blackbird had this little chamber, and he's like, "Whatever you got going here, if you can just record that." So we printed all of that. We did it all to 8-track, and then I flew it back to Brian in WAV files, and he put it in ACID. He had it all in ACID, and he flew it all back in. And then I never heard about it again for 4 years till it came out. And then a couple of weeks later, he called me, and he's like, "Hey, I'm going to do the Spanish language version of Conquest. Can you engineer that?" And I was like, "Sure." So we still had the master tapes from Icky Thump at the studio. So I pulled the master tapes. There was a master and a slave. There was 16 track. And I load the master and the slave up. And I'm going to transfer it to Pro Tools and try to find tracks to do this vocal, because I'm hoping there's a track on the master. Well, the second I play it, the master and the safety are like out of sync by about 700 milliseconds. And it was because right at the very last minute, Joe cut this pickup off the beginning of Conquest, because it starts da-da-da, but on the original, it was like ba-da. I think there was like a downbeat or something, and he cut it. So when he cut it, now the tracks would never lock back up. They were out of time. So whenever whatever was happening, I would have to like put a bunch of offsets and all that.
Right.
So what I did was I just made a copy. I just made a copy of the master, but I kept it queued up for Jack so I could show him because it was cool sounding, like really cool. And with the whole band going, da 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 da, you know, like all, and he's like, cool, remember that. So like, cool. So we, basically I made a new master for it, a second generation. And we did that. So that whole mix, and we did the whole thing. He recorded all of it. He had a girl that, to be honest with you, I think might have been somebody who worked at his house, come and help him with the language to get all the words right. And then we recorded it, and then I mixed it. Him and I mixed it, and we had a great time. And we listened to it in the car. He would put the CD in, and he'd turn it. He would turn his volume up like this because it just spun. It was a Mercedes. It would just be like this, all the way up 100%. And we'd blast it. And then he was like, great, man, I love it. It's awesome. We went on, and I didn't think anything about it. This is probably fall, The Raconteurs were scheduled back in. They had already recorded most of the record. They're scheduled back in February. And Joe was also doing My Morning Jacket. He was doing some overdubs and final stuff in A before. I think Michael Brauer mixed that. Or sending it off to mix. And it was the 23rd of December. I remember this really well because it's a really, really important little moment. I was walking from Studio D back over to my office, and I get this phone call, and it's Patrick Keeler, right? I go, hey, Pat. He goes, oh, no, it's not Pat. It's Jack White. I'm like, hey, Jack. And he's like, hey, man, are you busy in February? And I'm like,
no.
I got a day job. I mean, I've got gigs at Sputnik. I'm mixing a lot of stuff on the side, but like, I got a day job, I'm like, no. He's like, cool. I'm curious if you'd be interested in mixing the Raconteurs record. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, you got to be fucking kidding me. Would I be interested? Are you kidding? I go, yeah, Jack, I'd love to do that. He's like, cool, man. I think we'll be ready about the 1st of February. I'm like, all right, I'll put that on my calendar. Great. And then he hung up, and I was like, well, shit, holy fuck. This is like a big deal. It was a big deal to me. It was a big fucking gig. And then I thought, oh shit, they're firing Joe because Joe's supposed to mix this, so I wrote Joe this email, and I was like, I don't know what's going on. He just called me, and he said, oh man, don't worry about it. It's all cool. It's great. You'll do a great job. He was top notch, whether he really meant that or not. I love Joe, but you know what I mean? We all would be like, motherfucker, but to be honest with you, I think he was kind of sick of their shit, to be honest with you. So maybe that was the case. But he did come in and he did a couple weeks of finished final recording with him there in January, the end of January. And then right before I was supposed to start on like a Monday or a Tuesday. And he called and he says, hey man, can you come over and finish the night for me? I've got a plane to catch. And I was like, sure. I come over and he's like, cool, we got the Memphis Horns in there. Can you finish this? I'm like, yeah, Memphis Horns. Sure. Wayne Jackson, the Memphis Horns. Yeah, sure. So I finished that. And then the next morning they came back and we did another song. I think we did Switch and Spur next, or one of them, or Hold Up maybe. And then I said, well, what do you want to start mixing on? He's like, well, it's Duke and Solars. Let's start. And then we ended up sort of mixing it in order. And I honestly thought through the whole thing, well, he's fucking with me. I mean, they're going to send this to somebody real, And at the end of the night, we went out to the car and he's like, man, this is really great. I'll see you tomorrow. See you at noon. Like, okay. And then we just kept working. And I mixed that whole record in 7 days, 2 songs a day.
So,
and then it was all analog, 32 track analog. all 100%